Fireweed by Ethel Eliot. Chapter 1. For Her. Crystal, Selina's usually calm voice, was vehement, sharp. Crystal started and turned around. "What is it, Selina? What is the matter?" Selina put down the fine towel she was hem-stitching and went to the piazza railing. "You're not picking your larkspurs. Whatever has happened to you?" Certainly Crystal was picking her larkspurs. 3 long stalks lay across her arm now, and her sister's startling cry had just arrested her hand from gathering another. Crystal looked toward her sister, a little dazed. "Why, yes, for her, you know." "Well, Crystal, you are the funniest. I know her coming means a lot to you, but I didn't think you'd sacrifice your precious larkspurs, not even for her. Are you sure you want to? You won't be sorry?" Crystal shook her head. No, she would never be sorry. She gave her sister a reassuring smile for her doubtful one, and returned to the larkspur. Selina took up the dropped hem-stitching, but she did not recommence work at once. She was thinking about Crystal, wondering at her. This was not a new occupation for Selina, but usually it was a pleasant wonder. Today there was some anxiety mixed with it. Yes, she might as well face the truth. She was worried about Crystal. Of course, all Crystal's friends, and almost everyone else in Fairfleet, for the matter of that, were excited about Victoria Gildersleeve's having taken Seaview for the summer. Selina herself, while not exactly excited, was deeply interested. Victoria Gildersleeve was, she supposed, the greatest American actress. Some critics rated her as the greatest living actress in the world. However that might be, she was as universally known as any, for she acted for the silver screen as often as on the legitimate stage, and that carried her name and her fame into isolated communities that otherwise would never have heard of her. This was the way Selina and Crystal had had an opportunity of seeing her, right here in Little Fairfleet 2 years ago, acting in Romeo and Juliet. And ever since that movie, Crystal had been a changed girl. Young as she was then, not much over 14, she had determined on the spot to become an actress herself. Ever since, she had been reading Shakespeare and looking into her mirror. It was the mirror that bothered Selina, not Shakespeare. But there was more than the mirror. Crystal insisted on talking movies and actresses so persistently to her 2 especial girlfriends that their mother, Miss Grant, had complained to Selina. She really ought to get those ideas out of her head, Miss Grant said. Of course, most young girls do go through a phase of thinking themselves potential Victoria Gildersleeves and wanting to go on the stage, but it's silly, and really I can't have my Agnes and Esther getting stage struck along with Crystal. Do reason with her." Selina's reasoning took a different form from that which Miss Grant had indicated, but it was to some extent effective. She enlisted old John Hampkins for the enterprise, He was their once-a-week gardener, and their every-day-in-the-week gossip and advisor about things mechanical and agricultural. Between them, they got Crystal deeply interested in wildflower culture, a fad old John Henkins called this fashionable craze for wildflower gardening, but it was a fad that had the old man's hearty sanction. Something had been wanting in his life until he discovered the wildflowers. Now he felt that it was full. Selina suggested to him that he impart some of his enthusiasm to Crystal. He agreed to do his level best, and his level best was very good, for his was a communicative spirit. Soon Crystal was working right along beside him, out at the edge of the meadows, beyond the sundial, and almost before he realized it, she had worked him out of his job. She considered the wildflower garden hers now, and the rose garden as well, and the larkspurs. John Hankins had retired to the vegetables, but he was well content. He had a garden of his own at home, and there was work enough for him in Fairfleet, without him grudging that queer little Barker girl her delight. But in spite of gardening, Crystal had not been weaned from her first great enthusiasm, the stage, and now, in fact, she was sacrificing the kings of her garden, the blue larkspurs, to the theatre, to Victoria Gildersleeve. But why hadn't she picked roses? A bunch of pink roses would be ever so much more appropriate than the stiff larkspur. Selina knew why Crystal loved the larkspur, why it would really be an offering from her heart. At least she knew it as well as you could know anything about the workings of funny Crystal's mind. Their blue, from the very first, had affected Crystal strangely. "It's such a blue beyond blue," she said in speaking of them in moments of elation, "and they stand so straight and tall, and all the time keep that blue beyond blue. Oh, Selina, doesn't it make you feel queer?" No, it certainly did not make Selina feel queer, but she did see that the larkspurs were an especially nice shade of blue, and they looked quite lovely in the garden in the corner by the sundial. They had given Selina pleasure every time her eyes fell on them, a distinct, a special kind of pleasure, but nothing queer about it, and now they were sacrificed to the actress. But what would she do with the great awkward stalks when they were handed her? She wouldn't understand about the blue beyond blue and all that the offering meant to darling, funny Crystal. "Hello, hello, Selina. Where's Crystal?" Agnes and Esther Grant had walked in at the front door, as was their custom, and coming through found Selina on the piazza. "Oh, there she is," Agnes answered her own inquiry. "Down there. Hello, Crystal. 15 minutes to train time." Both girls were almost dancing with excitement. Agnes was carrying a rather large-sized bouquet of deep pink roses, tied with streamers of pink satin, ribbon. Esther's bouquet had a different character. It was a quaint little bunch of garden forget-me-nots, bound together with the grass. They stood before Selina now, as though on inspection. They were dressed in garden party clothes, and wide, floppy garden party hats. Agnes was in delicate wistaria, Esther in white. "Do you like us, Selina?" Agnes asked. And then before she had her answer to that, she asked another question. "Do you think it cheeky of us, taking her flowers? Will she mind?" Crystal had come up to the sundial path and joined them. Her friends looked at the long stalks on her arm with surprise. "No, I don't think Victoria Gildersleeve will mind your giving her flowers," Selina was saying in her cool, low voice. "I don't even think she'll mind Crystal's larkspur, awkward as it is. Probably her maid will carry them for her. I can't imagine anyone being too famous or spoiled to like a gift of flowers. And those dresses and your hats are charming." "But, Crystal, it's almost train time. You aren't going in that dress, are you?" Agnes exclaimed, with real concern. "I thought, of course, you'd be wearing your blue muslin. Mother thought so, too." Crystal glanced hurriedly down at her frock. It was pale yellow linen, a plain garment without any claim to special distinction except for its texture and color, which for some reason always made Crystal think of ancient Egypt, and Selina's fine hem-stitching on the cuffs and collar. Crystal had been so absorbed in thoughts about Victoria Gildersleeve and the larkspur that she had entirely forgotten herself. Her startled face now told them that, and it was almost train time. "No, there isn't time to change," Selina assured her, "and you're all right anyway. Agnes and Esther are going to the lawn party at Blue Diamond, remember. I think you're much better as you are, just for the train. I had already thought of it. Mother says it's the queerest thing, you're not being asked to Madame Coldwater's lawn party. It's not only the summer people who are asked. It's the villagers, too, everybody." Selina had returned to her hem-stitching. She did not lift her eyes as she answered. "If everyone's asked, it might seem like a distinction not being, mightn't it?" Agnes and Esther did not stop to take this in. Agnes went on. "Mother says that Madame Coldwater will almost certainly do something for Victoria Gildersleeve right away. A dinner party, probably. It isn't as though she were just an ordinary actress. Mother says even Madame Coldwater realizes that, though she hasn't said much about it. And if she does give a party and asks Mother to meet Victoria, then Mother is going to give a dinner party herself and let Esther and me come in afterwards. Isn't that wonderful?" It was Crystal's shining eyes that agreed to the wonder of it. Selina's were bent upon her work, but it was Selina who answered. "If Madame Coldwater, as you all call her, is going to take Victoria Gildersleeve up, then none of the Fairfleet people, except your mother, of course, are likely to get a glimpse of her. She will have to choose between Blue Diamond and Fairfleet." "Oh, but Madame Coldwater has house parties all the time, and such famous and wonderful people staying with her. It's like a village itself, Blue Diamond. Mother says that Victoria will naturally want to know Madame Coldwater and her friends, but Mother is friends with most of the summer people here, as well as with Madame Coldwater. So why can't Victoria Gildersleeve be too?" Well, of course, she can, but I don't imagine she will want to. Selina spoke, quite impersonally, in the cool tones of disinterest. What impressed and pleased the two Grant girls was the way she treated them as though they were her own age, without any condescension whatever. Selina was 20, and most girls of 20 treat 15 and 16 with condescension, if not contempt. But Selina was different. She was always herself, and it was herself she gave to people, whether they were younger, the same age, or much older. Agnes and Esther liked to talk with her. She had a way of making them feel grown up and reasonable. But more than to talk, with her they enjoyed looking at her, as they were doing now, for Selina was beautiful. It was a sure beauty that no one denied, and no one wanted to, for while Selina was beautiful, it was apparent at a glance that she was careless of her beauty. She did not take it seriously, and that lent it an extraordinary fascination. Her honey-colored hair, while smooth and becomingly knotted at the back of her head, did not look as though she had given it many thoughts while dressing it. Her clear, sunny brow, her serene, beautifully shaped gray eyes, the tranquil loveliness of her face, seemed only the expression of the calm, friendly person within. It had become so still on the porch that Selina lifted her eyes. Crystal, Agnes, and Esther were simply standing and looking at her. Often Selina glanced up to find the persons present silent and staring. It did not embarrass her, for she could not realize that it was sheer admiration that held them silent. Now she said, "Well, hadn't you better go? You don't want to miss the train, do you?" No, the girls had no intention of missing Victoria Gildersleeve's arrival. Crystal begged uneasily, "I am truly all right. This linen isn't too mussed." "You've worn it only once before. It's perfectly all right. Have a nice time at the garden party, Agnes and Esther. Remember all the details to tell us." "Yes, they'll do that, and I'll be right back to tell you all about Victoria," Crystal promised for her friends and for herself. And that instant she was actually glad that she and Selina were not going to the garden party. Her first impressions of the great actress would remain unmixed with other impressions, and they could talk it all out together while it was still fresh. The three girls went away, Crystal in the middle. The elm-shaded streets of this elm-shaded New England village were empty of life at this hour. This was to be expected on ordinary days, but it rather surprised the girls that it should be so today, a few minutes before the New York train's arrival, and Victoria Gildersleeve coming on that train. It made them think they must have miscalculated the time after all, and be a little late. This hurried their steps, but not so much as to stop conversation. "Do you suppose her eyelashes are really as long as they are in the pictures of her?" Agnes was wondering. "Or does she bead them? Mother says she probably beads them for the pictures, and that when we see her today, they won't be particularly marvelous at all. Will she be made up, all rouge and carmine lips and everything? And what kind of clothes do you suppose she'll be wearing? I can't quite imagine how she will look, can you, just getting off the New York train at our station. Somehow it seems as though it couldn't happen. It's like a character in a story coming to life. Crystal agreed with Esther in this last idea. She turned to look at the younger girl with understanding, but she herself remained silent. Some moments are too exciting for speech. Last February, Miss Putnam let any one in the school who wanted to go see her as Juliet. Agnes said, pretty nearly the whole school went. It was too perfectly wonderful. This fall, before Victoria starts on her round-the-world tour, Mother's promised to take us to New York to see her in it again. It's going to be her farewell performance, you know. Crystal sighed audibly. When she and Selina had seen the great actress as Juliet, it had been only a screen version, but even in the pictures, without the spoken word, Victoria Gildersleeve had decided Crystal's whole future, so Crystal believed, and filled her with a purpose and a desire that now had a part in every hour of her life. But to have seen her as Juliet in the flesh, to have heard her voice, such felicity would be beyond words. I've seen her in so many different parts, Agnes went on, very much aware of Crystal's envious sigh. Juliet was the only time on the stage, though. Other times it was movies. But now it's funny to wonder what she looks like in real life. Like Esther, I can't quite imagine. Will she be like Lorna Doone, or Babby, or Rebecca, or Roxana, or Joan, or Miss Windermere? It's funny, isn't it, not having an idea? That's what makes it so exciting. I've only seen her as Juliet, and that was the movies. They knew this already, but Crystal wanted to say something. She looked about 16 then, no older than me. But of course, she is older, and it must have been her clothes, and makeup too. She is married and has children, and she's been famous for years. She must be almost 30. But whatever she's like, when she gets off the train, of course, it will be wonderful and strange. Strange? The other two asked. Strange. Crystal often said queer things. But this wasn't only queer in itself. It was the tone in which she had said it that was queer. It was so sure, and low, and mysterious. She's so wonderful, of course. She must be strange. Aren't wonderful things always strange? The girls did not answer that. Instead, Agnes exclaimed, I'll tell you what's really strange, Crystal. The way seeing her once act Juliet in the movies has made you so determined to be an actress and care so much about the theater. Mother thinks it's strange, too. Mother says she's grateful we aren't so crazy about actresses having crushes and things. Victoria's different, of course. Mother herself wants to know her and see her. Agnes interrupted Esther. Mother says it's a terrible life to be an actress, and they're usually so ordinary. Only a few great ones, like Victoria Gildersleeve, reach the top. But just to start in and be an actress, she says it's the last thing in the world she'd want us to do. Crystal defended herself. All the same, you're every bit as excited as I am about Victoria Gildersleeve's coming today. That's different, I keep telling you. She is the greatest actress we've got. Why shouldn't we be excited? More than that, she knows great people. Why, she stayed with the Queen of England once, visited her. but she's an actress in thousands. You don't expect to be as great as she is, do you?" "Perhaps. Why shouldn't I be?" Crystal's friends gasped. Why, how could you be? You're just a human being. Victoria Gildersleeve was, too, don't you suppose? But she made up her mind to be an actress. I've read about it any number of times. She made up her mind when she was 12, and I'm 16, and she thought about it, and thought, and worked by herself, practicing in her bedroom. Her family didn't want her to be an actress. They were rich and awfully proud. They wanted her to be just like other society girls, and they wouldn't help her. Still, see what she has done." Yes, Agnes agreed. She knew all about Victoria Gildersleeve, of course. Who didn't? But she was born that way. She was a genius. How can you tell I'm not? Agnes did not deign to answer such blatant egotism. She went on developing her theme, or rather her mother's theme. Mother says 2 girls out of 3, some time or other, get crazy about the stage and want to act, but it doesn't do them any good. It only makes them cheap. This winter, Miss Putnam put a girl out of the school because she got crazy about actresses and couldn't talk of anything else. She rouged her face and knew all about different powders and perfumes and things. Mother was one of the parents who complained. Complained? Why? You must have talked about her. Crystal was sharp with surprise. Of course we talked about her. Who wouldn't? At Graham Manor, we're all supposed to come from nice homes. Miss Putnam began to think that Isabella hadn't, that she wasn't really nice. And then, when her mother came to take her away, anyone could see where Isabella got it all. She was so overdressed and queer, the mother. But you and Selina aren't like them, of course. You're just like Miss Putnam's girls, really. That's why you're behaving the way Isabella behaved seems so funny." "Thank you," Crystal responded, in a tone a little flat. "But I'm not sure I want to be like Miss Putnam's girls. Not if being an actress makes the difference anyway. I'm not an actress yet, but I might as well be, because I am so sure I'm going to be. I'll tell your mother so." "Don't," Agnes advised hurriedly, "and let's not quarrel. It's going to be such fun at the station. Isn't it too thrilling that in just a minute or 2 we'll see her here in broad daylight? Let's hurry." They heard the whistle of the engine now, and this added the final touch to their excitement. Agnes clutched Crystal's arm, and Esther took a sudden skip all by herself, a little girl skip. Then Agnes pulled her floppy garden party hat to a more fashionable angle over her eyes, and Esther straightened her narrow blue sash. Crystal, bareheaded, her eyes shining, moved almost as though she were in church, in spite of their hurry, and she gave a final touch of arrangement to her blue larkspur. So the 3 girls turned from Main Street into the very short, cobbled alley which ended at the station steps. Chapter 2. Call Me Hebe. There were only a few people on the platform. In fact, it was the usual handful who always did meet the New York train, just for the pleasure of seeing it steam in and out again, and the chance of a passenger or two arriving by it. The absence of a crowd surprised the girls and made them almost halt at the steps. Why, they had expected the place to be thronged with summer people and village people and the band playing. Old John Hankins was bandmaster, and just yesterday he had given Crystal an account of the program that had been planned in honor of the great actress. Well, where was the band now, and where were the throngs that surely had been expected? As the girls hesitated in their amazement, a smart little roadster came sweeping around the drive from the other side of the station, and Agnes and Esther exclaimed, as they saw it was their mother's. Why had she come? Certainly she had had no such intention when they left the house half an hour ago. She was one of the very few people in Fairfleet who had been content to await the occasion of a social opportunity to meet the great actress. She beckoned them over to her now, where she had brought her car to a stop beyond the baggage room door, out of sight of the platform. Such a shame, she greeted them. Nellie just happened to mention it. At least I asked her why she hadn't changed her dress and gone to the station. She said it was in the paper last night, but we never read Fairfleet's Chronicle, of course, and we really ought. This proves it. Victoria Gildersleeve's not coming. She has changed her mind and is just sending her children. She won't be here for the summer at all. Miss Grant sat behind her wheel, as smart and bright-looking as her car, dressed in a white wool jersey suit, her hat white felt, with a jaunty dent in the crown, and a white veil blowing back from it, lending it dignity. She was a pretty woman, and a glance from her brilliant eyes made it plain as day that she was a clever woman too. After seeing the mother, one understood why her daughters quoted her so frequently. Her personality was a potent one. At her words, the three girls stood aghast. It was Esther who first found words. "Didn't I tell you?" she cried, turning on the other two. "Didn't I say it couldn't happen? It would be too much like someone in a book coming to life. We really couldn't see Victoria Gildersleeve here today, just in broad daylight." "But her children are coming," Miss Grant repeated. "That is something, though not so much, of course. I think it would be very nice of you to go on up, just the same, and give your flowers to them." The children. Of course, they had known that there were children, but the children had never entered into their schemes at all. Miss Grant enlarged upon it. If you are nice to the children and get acquainted, who knows what that may not lead to? Their mother may change her plans and come up some time during the summer. In fact, it would be strange if she didn't, I should think. In any case, the children are there. It won't do any harm to give them the flowers. But the children, Agnes and Esther looked very much dashed. What would a child do with such a bouquet as Agnes had contrived for Victoria? Esther's compact little bunch of forget-me-nots was better, but even so, to give to children what had been destined for the great actress. Miss Grant saw the hesitation and distaste in their faces. "It's too bad," she said, comfortingly, "but it's the best you can do. Brace up and run along like sensible girls." The little car set up an effective purring and backed away, turning sputteringly about in the narrow drive. Miss Grant gave them all three a parting, encouraging smile and was off. And there was the train thundering into the station. The girls hurried up the steps and out through the baggage room, a shortcut to the train platform. Crystal was in a daze. Miss Grant had spoken clearly and with precision. She always did. But Crystal did not seem to have taken in exactly what it all meant. Sudden disappointments are more difficult than sudden joys to accept. "Which car will they be in, do you suppose?" Agnes cried, above the noise, clutching Crystal's arm. Crystal shook her head, not trying to answer. How should she know? And what did it matter? But passengers were alighting from only one car, the only parlor car the train boasted, and so the question answered itself. A boy and a girl came first, but they were hardly children. The girl looked about 15, and the boy a little older. In spite of her age, the girl wore her blonde hair in 2 braids, very smooth, thick, and efficient braids they were. Her hat was a round black sailor, surprising but becoming, but her dress was the most astonishing, that is, if she was Victoria Gildersleeve's daughter, traveling up from New York. It was simply blue and white checked gingham, the waist buttoned down the back with pearl buttons in almost little girl fashion. Her stockings were tan and not silk, and her footwear merely white sneakers and not immaculate. On a leash she held a noble-looking police dog, gray and enormous, in spite of his aristocratic leanness. Were dogs like that allowed in parlor cars? Well, of course, a Gildersleeve might obtain special privileges. She had nice blue eyes, the girl, sea blue, and almost startlingly clear. They quite made up for her rather snubby nose, with freckles thickly spattered across its brim. Her face was broad at the brows, and her chin forceful. Any one was bound to like her at a glance, and more than that, to keep on liking her. Agnes, who was standing very near, spoke to her. Are you a Gildersleeve?" she asked. The girl nodded, the frank, unquestioning nod of a boy. Agnes and Esther thrust their bouquets into her hands. "Then these are for you," Agnes explained. "Oh, I say, really?" The girl's embarrassment was as obvious as her pleasure, more obvious perhaps. She turned her head toward the boy, who had followed down out of the car close on her heels. The boy was not like his sister a bit. On first seeing him, one could only wonder and reserve liking or disliking for time to mold. He was a tall, very angular youth, with a dark head held strangely up in the air, his nose high-bridged, strikingly aristocratic, his eyes intense, luminous, but not interested in people, searching the tree-tops, the sky, and the far horizons instead. He moved springingly. His gray suit was loose and flappy, perhaps half a size too large, except where it was a fraction of an inch too short at the wrist. He too wore sneakers, brown ones, and the lacing of one of them had come undone. He was turning at the bottom of the car steps to lend a hand to the woman following him, but he was giving the hand absent-mindedly, with no gesture of chivalry. He would always be too absent-minded to be chivalrous. How did Crystal understand that so well? The Grant girls had turned their backs, their attention centered entirely on the girl to whom they had given the flowers, who was still thanking them and answering their questions frankly and interestedly. But Crystal was taking no part. She stood a little isolated, her full attention given to the people still alighting from the train. The woman to whom the boy was reaching a hand was tall, gaunt, dark, with a quiet intensity of face. Crystal knew at once that she must be foreign. She knew it before she heard her words, spoken in a deep, rich voice, and not one of them understandable. The boy answered her absently, with a monosyllable, several times repeating, "Si." So she was Italian. Crystal dropped the Italian woman out of her consciousness. No, she was not Victoria Gildersleeve, for Crystal, standing there watching so quietly, had begun to expect Victoria Gildersleeve herself to appear, in spite of what Miss Grant had told them. Crystal by now had taken in all that Miss Grant said. She realized, too, that the band was not here, nor the crowd of people that surely would be present if Victoria Gildersleeve were expected. She remembered that last night the Chronicle, for some reason, had not been thrown in at their door by the usually faithful paper boy, and that all day she and Selina had not spoken to a single soul, except each other, because of a special piece of work they had been doing in the garden. So they had missed the news. All this reasonable thinking Crystal was able to perform, and still hold deep in her heart the conviction that Victoria Gildersleeve must get down from the train. She had looked forward to this minute so intensely and so long. There was only one other person, and the Gildersleeve party was completed. The servants had come up yesterday by motor and already had established themselves at Seaview. As that last person came down the 2 steps from the train vestibule, her eyes and Crystal's met. She was a young woman, neither tall nor short, light nor dark, smartly nor dowdily dressed. About each of the others of the group there had been something definitely striking. About this person there was nothing striking, unless indeed her very lack of a special note was in itself striking. She wore a gray silk hat, soft and undecorated, and from her head to her ankles she was swathed in a cape of some dark, smooth, cool material. On her feet she wore gray, heelless sandals. Perhaps the sandals were a little odd, if one were looking for differences, but something had happened to Crystal that had not happened to the other spectators. Her glance had directly met the glance of the stranger. Both glances held and became a steady gaze. Her gray sandaled feet had come safely to rest on the platform. The others of her party were already moving toward the street, and the taxi waiting for them there, and still the stranger stood, her eyes in Crystal's. It was only an instant, really, but such instants are to be measured by other values than the clocks. Crystal held her larkspurs out to the stranger. "They are for you," she said. "For me? Why?" Her voice had struck a second note. The heelless sandals would be forgotten in the voice by one looking for strangeness. The voice was like the gaze of her eyes. "They were for Victoria Gildersleeve," Crystal honestly explained. "But she's not coming, I guess. I'd like to give them to you." Still, the stranger did not take them. "Those are Victoria Gildersleeve's children," she said, indicating the boy and the girl, who, flanked by Agnes and Esther, had reached the taxi. "Others have given their flowers to them. Hadn't you better?" Crystal turned her head to look again at the tall boy and the girl with blonde braids. "Oh no, I couldn't give my larkspurs to them," she said with gentle assurance. "I didn't think I could give them to anyone, but now I'd like." Her eyes said the rest. The stranger smiled, at least in remembering it afterward. Crystal was almost sure she had smiled. "Well, if you'd like, I'd like too. Your larkspurs are a wonderful blue, almost a blue beyond blue." "You see that too." Impetuously Crystal put them into her arms. As she received them, throwing back her cape a little to do it, Crystal noticed that it was lined with yellow. This surprising betrayal of color was the third and final note of strangeness. Now the stranger turned definitely toward the drive and the group waiting there. Agnes and Esther still remained, talking to the girl who appeared to be about to get into the taxi. The boy stood a little to one side, indifferent, his chin high, observing the tops of the poplars that fenced the station park. Crystal's new acquaintance began moving toward them. Crystal went with her in order to rejoin Agnes and Esther. But before they arrived, the Gildersleeve girl and Agnes and Esther, after glancing around at their approach, suddenly started off arm in arm, apparently meaning to walk up to Sea View together. The Gildersleeve boy followed them, still absent-mindedly. The Italian woman was left alone. "I see the children are walking," Crystal's new friend said to the Italian. "I think I shall too. You go on in the taxi, Bianca, and I shall find my own way," stretching my legs. "Oh, I can show you the way," Crystal offered. She thought it very strange of the Gildersleeve boy and girl to go off so carelessly without telling their plans to their traveling companion. And as for Agnes and Esther, had they forgotten her, Crystal, altogether? The Italian woman looked at Crystal with somber curiosity, and then at the larkspurs in the other woman's hands. "Alone, walking, Hebe," she exclaimed in broken English, "through the street." Then she fell into Italian and talked for a second very fast. Hebe, that was evidently her name. The Italian woman had interjected it frequently in her expostulations, said calmly, when she was done, "It is all right, perfectly all right, Bianca. This child will show me the way." Ordinarily, to be spoken of as "this child" would have been unpleasant to Crystal, but spoken by Hebe it had no sting. Bianca turned toward Crystal again, with curiosity and apparent uneasiness. Again her eyes went from her to the larkspurs in Hebe's arms. She offered to take the flowers. Crystal knew by her gestures But Hebe shook her head. "No, I'll keep them. They will companion me." Protesting, then only by her dark glances, the Italian woman got into the taxi with the suitcases and was whisked away. "Now," Hebe turned to Crystal, "if you will give me directions, I shall be grateful." For a breath, Crystal hesitated. Then she blurted, "Would you mind if I walked with you?" Hebe waited for about as long a breath as Crystal had held. Then she agreed without smiling. "First, I must tell you who I am, though." She spoke very distinctly and slowly. "I am Bianca Folgana's friend. She is the Gildersleeves' housekeeper. I think I am going to spend the summer here with her." Again she hesitated. "She and the children, the Gildersleeve children, call me Hebe. You may too." Hebe was the goddess of youth, Crystal stated. As she said it and looked at the stranger, she felt as though here in Fairfleet's railway station, in the broad daylight, she had met and been spoken to by a goddess, and whatever Crystal thought she was likely to show in her face, it was flushed now and plainly awed. Hebe did not smile. "I am named for her," she said, "but I am not the goddess herself. Shall we go?" The words dispelled Crystal's awe and brought her back to common sense. Side by side they started off, out the cobbled alley. When they turned into Main Street, there ahead of them, by the old town pump, they saw Agnes and Esther and the Gildersleeve girl waiting, and looking back toward them with curiosity. After all, then, they had not been so indifferent as they appeared. But while Crystal was glad of this, for Hebe's sake, for her own she was sorry. She didn't want to walk up to Seaview with those girls. She wanted Hebe alone. In a group, Crystal instinctively knew Hebe's long dark cape would stay wrapped around her, giving no hint of its jubilant lining and her gaiety that needed no smiling, was too light to be felt where there was chattering. But Crystal need not have bothered. The girls had no intention of waiting for them. When they saw the two appear together in Main Street, the Gildersleeve girl waved nonchalantly and started forward again, walking between Agnes and Esther as though she meant to overtake her brother, who was far ahead with the dog. This surprised Crystal, but Hebe was not surprised. She took it quite as a matter of course that they should be left to walk by themselves. Chapter 3. Funny Crystal. That evening, toward 6 o'clock, the telephone rang. Crystal came down the stairs, two at a time, expecting that it might be Agnes, to tell her about the lawn party. Yes, it was Agnes, an excited and slightly apologetic Agnes. "Hello, Crystal? That you?" "Yes." "You aren't peeved, are you?" "Peeved? No. Why?" "Well, are going off like that with Hilda and Paul." "No. Are those their names?" "Do tell me about the party first. Was it fun?" "Scrumptious. Grand glorious. Several people asked about you and Selina. Everyone thinks it awfully queer, your not being invited. Madame Coldwater was too lovely. Such a costume. Like a queen or something." I just stared and stared at her, couldn't stop. I'd give anything if you'd gone so we could talk it over. But I'm even more thrilled by Hilda and Paul, especially Hilda. Imagine our thinking they were just children. It's going to be great having 'em here this summer. Don't you think so? Yes, and Hebe too. I'm thrilled about Hebe. A pause followed, that at the other end of the wire. Then, in a burst, Agnes answered, "Say, child, do you know who Hebe is, whom you gave your larkspurs to, who she is?" "Yes, she's the housekeeper's friend, somebody here visiting the Italian they've got for a housekeeper. Hilda was convulsed that you gave her the flowers. She wondered about it a lot. Why did you?" "Because I wanted to, of course." Crystal was silent an instant. Then she finished, in a definite but gentle voice, "She's simply great. Hebe is. Well, Mother thinks you're just as funny as I do. She said to tell you who she was anyway, just the housekeeper's friend. She told me herself that she's Bianca Folgana's friend. But Agnes, I'm glad you like the girl. Is she nice?" "She looked jolly." "You bet she is. A peach. We're in luck, I'll say, having her right here all summer. She swims and plays tennis and everything. We walked all the way up to the Red House with her. Actually, I hated leaving to go to the party." "The Red House? Do you mean Seaview?" "Yes. Hilda says her mother says Seaview's a stupid name. They're going to call it the Red House. Just that." "Did she talk about her mother?" Crystal was all eagerness. "No, only that about the house. What she'd said about its name. She doesn't seem to like to talk about her mother much, though. Paul's awfully timid, different from Hilda. He's only interested in birds, and he acts deaf, but he isn't. And yes, oh, all right, sorry, Mother says I've got to hang up and wait till I see you for the rest. Goodbye." Crystal had been interrupted in her supper toilet. She and Selina had spent the latter part of the afternoon grubbing in the earth, preparing for the wild flowers they meant to find in the woods some day soon and plant in a rock garden out beyond the strawberry beds. A few minutes ago they had come in, hot and grubby, intending to clean up hurriedly and then go down to the kitchen to get supper together. Already supper was late, and Selina was going out tonight to a bridge party, so there was need of haste. But this telephone conversation had thrown Crystal off and made her forget the time and her responsibilities. Instead of running back upstairs to her bedroom, she hung the receiver up slowly and sat there by the telephone, chin in hand, her elbow supported by the little telephone table, gazing unseeingly at the pine trees that decorated the hall wallpaper. She was living over again her walk up to Seaview, up to the Red House, with the new friend who had said she might call her Hebe. It felt to Crystal that she had come to a fresh starting place in her life almost. All last winter and this spring there had been the quiet routine of the quiet days in snowbound Fairfleet, the long walk to and from the high school, the hours in school, church, the church socials, choral meetings, and long evenings at home with Selina and books. It had seemed as though it would go on, pleasantly and comfortably forever. And then suddenly summer occurred. Agnes and Esther returned from boarding school. The summer people flocked back, like migrating birds, and settled in their nest, snuggled in rose and peony-grown gardens in the village, or out at the shore in summer cottages. For 2 weeks now, Agnes and Crystal had been together constantly, as they had been all last summer. And today, to crown it all, there was Hebe. But no, it was not a crowning, not a finishing touch to the already overflowing summer. It was the beginning of something new and strange. That was why Crystal sat with unseeing eyes, taking this opportunity of the still hall to live over again that walk with Hebe. Queer, she couldn't remember her face, but she remembered the way she walked. That was because she walked differently from other people. She walked as though walking were no effort, as though she were merely thinking herself forward, perhaps as though she were the real Hebe, the goddess. Was she pretty as well as graceful? Of that Crystal hadn't an idea. When she looked at Hebe, she seemed to look through her, as though she were only a mirror for the things Crystal herself was thinking, and for the summer afternoon. But as she moved, once or twice, Crystal had caught again the glimmering of the lining of the dark cape. It seemed the clue to something magical. Strange that from any one so quiet as Hebe she had carried away the conviction of such gaiety. If Hebe had leapt along like a little girl in a spring dance, Crystal would hardly have felt surprise, or if she had laughed constant continuous laughter as a matter of fact, Crystal was quite sure Hebe had not smiled, to say nothing of laughter, and she certainly hadn't danced. Then why think of her as doing both those things? Well, she just did think of her that way, and that was all there was to it. Although Hebe had said very little, very, very little, when you had begun to remember the actual words, it was really as though she had said a great deal. Crystal knew that she liked the village street, that it delighted her. She liked all the old houses, the arcing elms, and the glimpses between houses and hedges of fields and meadows. But I thought it was a more rural village, she had exclaimed, surprised. So many of these houses are really fine places. Crystal explained that 2/3 of the population had come to be summer people, and most of the big houses were owned by them. But this, Hebe said, stopping short directly in front of Crystal's own house. What is this? It is adorable. Please don't tell me it belongs to your summer people too. It looks like something in a fairy tale. Crystal's eyes had shone. That is ours. We live there, all the year round. It's home. We call it Tinkle Bell. How wonderful that Hebe had liked Tinkle Bell better than any other place they passed. It was really so little, so quiet, and it did need paint. It had flowers, though, to make up, yellow daffodils and red poppies growing haphazardly right up in the front lawn, and an arbor around at the side, deep in honeysuckle. The house itself was more than 100 years old, built for comfort and happening on beauty. there was an old fan door and a big flat white door stone, a door stone that had a crack with bluebells growing in it. Standing there in the lace-like shadow and shade of the elm trees, Hebe had said, "Does your door stone reflect the sky? It looks as though it might, and the white fluffy clouds too." Then, of course, Crystal knew why she and Hebe were to be friends. It was because Hebe was funny too. Crystal thought things like that and said them, sometimes, when she was absent-minded. And here was someone like herself at last. Crystal forgot to answer. She was so glad. It interested Hebe that Crystal and her sister lived in Tingle Bell alone, and so Crystal found herself telling her how it had happened. Until she herself was 13, and Selina 17, they had lived with an uncle's family in East Lexington, a big, lively, careless family, in a house much too small. Their grandmother, their father's mother, had really been the head of the family, not the uncle, and it was to her that Crystal and Selina gave most of their affection, for the aunt and uncle and cousins were so different from themselves, so lively and noisy and rough and tumble and laughing, that Crystal and Selina had always been submerged and rather bewildered. The grandmother's room was the one quiet spot in the house, and the sole orderly one too, and it was in her room and in her heart that the two girls found refuge from the alien life below stairs. Earlier, when Crystal was quite a little girl, they had lived with their mother and her father in Cambridge. Grandfather had been a philosophy professor at Harvard. Their father they had never known. The Cambridge house was big and dim and quiet. Perhaps that was why the noise in the small Lexington house had seemed so unhomelike. But when their grandfather's death followed close on their mother's, that had been the only place for them to go. Those deaths were so far away now, back in her earliest memories, that they were more like a story to her than her own experience. But her grandmother's death was different. She was 13 then, and that loss had been so terrible that even now it did not bear speaking of. She passed it lightly in her recounting, with the mere brush of words. The uncle had been waiting for exactly that event, though to transplant his family to California, he took it for granted that Selina and Crystal would transplant with them. But Selina said no. She was old enough now, 17, to take Crystal to the house in Fairfleet, which they had inherited from their mother but never seen. They could be a family themselves. There had been a storm in the nature of a cyclone, when everyone argued and shouted and banged on tables, and then suddenly the stillness after storm, and in the stillness, safe and relieved, Crystal found herself alone with Selina, keeping house at Tingle Bell. Ever since, the two girls had been a law unto themselves, a complete family, their nearest relatives far away on the other side of the continent. There Crystal had stopped short in her disclosures. Why had she told all that about herself and her family? Selina wouldn't approve, and she didn't. herself approve. One simply didn't talk about oneself that way to a stranger. It was absurd. She looked sideways at Hebe, humiliated. But Hebe's profile was reassuring. There was no criticism, only interest and understanding. Not even a smile for Crystal's eager emphasis on the necessity for quiet if one was to be happy. Crystal breathed relief. The remainder of the walk was passed mostly in silence. It was then that Crystal noticed how wonderfully Hebe walked. And now Crystal was convinced that Hebe's coming to Fairfleet was the beginning of something. What, she did not know. A new season. She said the words to herself. Yes, a new season. One not on the calendar. Her gaze, which had been for some while centered on the pine trees, pictured on the hall wall-paper, now began to take them in. The late afternoon light streamed through the open, screened front door, bathing the place with a thin wash of coppery light. For Crystal, it turned the formal, stiff design of trees into a forest, a real pine forest that stretched back and back, perhaps to the sea, or perhaps to a purple mountain. Crystal wondered which it was, sea or mountain. She walked a little way forward, in her imagination, to find out. She was in under the trees, looking up into the branches that were washed in that peculiar coppery light. She leaned against the trunk. Then she started. She was back sitting by the telephone, her chin in her hand, her elbow resting on the telephone table. What had startled her back? There it came again. A step over her head in the room above. It was Selina's room. Selina was moving about there. She must have finished brushing her honey-colored hair. It was twisted now in smooth coils at the back of her head, held by amber hairpins. Broad-faced, flat, beautifully smooth pins. Selina would be almost ready to come down, and here was Crystal sitting, daydreaming, her dark hair tumbled on her shoulders, in a kimono and stocking feet. She dashed back up the stairs and into her room, but she dashed softly. She was ashamed at having spent so much time daydreaming. If she raced, though, she might even yet make up the lost time. But she fell into another dream at the mirror and forgot to hurry. Why wasn't she more disappointed about Victoria Gildersleeve's not coming? If someone had told her this morning that tonight she would be sitting here at her mirror doing her hair, or about to do it for supper, and that before that time she would not have seen and given her larkspurs to the actress, she would have been dreary indeed. For almost 2 years past she had been living in the high hope of some day seeing the actress, really, not in the pictures, but on the stage. And when this spring the news came that Victoria Gildersleeve was actually to spend the summer in Fairfleet, it had seemed to Crystal like a prayer answered. No, like a prayer over-answered, for in her farthest imaginings it had never entered her head that she might know Victoria personally, might stand within touching distance of her, speak to her, be spoken to by her, and give her flowers. At least, such a dream had not presented itself to her as possible of realization, until years and years should pass, until she herself, in fact, should have attained fame as an actress, and so been raised to Victoria's level. It had taken weeks to accept the thought that she need not wait for that distant day of fame, but that right here in Fairfleet this summer the miraculous was to happen. But from the minute when she had been able to accept it, she had walked around rather in a trance. The Grant girls' homecoming from school had not had its usual effect upon her. That excitement had dimmed to a shadow beside the other event so soon to occur. Even her dear Selina had become unreal. Their not being included in Madame Coldwater's broadcast of invitations to her garden party had not seemed to matter in the least. Nothing mattered but the coming of Victoria Gildersleeve. And now the so breathlessly waited hour had come and not brought the actress, and here was Crystal, leaning on her dressing table, looking absently into her own eyes, not caring. Oh yes, of course, she was caring, but not so much that it hurt and was a pain. It had been a pain, a quite surprising pain, at the station during the few seconds between Miss Grant's arrival and her own exchange of looks with the stranger, with Hebe, for it was Hebe who had brought relief. Hebe had changed everything. Of course it was disappointing, terribly disappointing, about Victoria Gildersleeve, but after all, what Miss Grant had said was true. She would probably come to see her children some time during the summer. Funny to call them children, a big boy and girl like that. It was wonderful, the chance Crystal was to have to know them. That would be next best to knowing Victoria herself. No, not exactly next best. Third best. Hebe was next best. It didn't matter that she was only the housekeeper's friend. Why had Agnes given that information in such an unpleasant tone? Crystal was glad she had been able to answer back. Yes, she told me that herself. Boarding school made girls snobbish. Snobbish was a word Miss Grant would never approve of one's using. But why? It was a word that one thought sometimes. Why ignore it so and pretend it didn't exist in one's vocabulary? Well, forget about Agnes and Miss Grant. Think about Hebe. How gravely she had taken the larkspurs. She had seemed to understand how precious they were. When would she see her again? Nothing had been said about that. They had parted at the entrance of the drive up to Seaview. Hebe stood, her dark cape quite enveloping her, the larkspurs a wing of color against her shoulder, looking at Crystal gravely, her lips just bent upward, a trifle at their corners, not with smiling, but with cool friendliness. Hebe said, "I like the Red House." She called it the Red House, as Victoria Gildersleeve wanted her children too. "But it's not so nice as your Tinkle Bell." Crystal said, "Oh, won't you come to see us then? Selina and I would love you too." Hebe's response to that was a little absent yes. "Would you? That is kind, perhaps some time." That had been their parting, so there was no promise, but if Crystal went up to see Hilda and Paul, of course she would be friends, and see a lot of them. If Agnes and Esther did, then Hebe would be there, and she would see her too. Certainly it wasn't, and it never could be, as though Victoria herself had come, but something had come, something beautiful. Now Crystal became conscious of her eyes in the mirror, as she had become conscious of the pine trees decorating the wallpaper a little while ago. The same coppery light was over them that had been over the forest. They were an odd color, her eyes, in this late afternoon light. If she could get into them, away back into the clear coppery distance in them. A door had been opened, and now blew shut. Selina was going down the stairs. It wasn't fair. Crystal thought herself a horrid person. At this rate, Selina would be setting the table, as well as cooking the supper, before Crystal got down. It was always happening like this. Why was she so slow? She reached for her brush hastily, but in spite of the hurry of the next few minutes, Crystal kept her sense of elation as she dressed. Chapter 4. Speaking of weeds. The Grants were having a rather late breakfast on the screened porch attached to their dining room. The leaves of the maples in the yard stirred gently. Robins hopped on the lawn, and a bob white whistled somewhere out beyond the garage. The breakfast table and the people around it would have made a perfect advertisement for a national breakfast food, done in color on a large, glossy page of a woman's magazine, all except Dr. Grant himself, a big, angular, tired-looking man, prematurely very gray. He would be a little out of the picture, but the others, in their very perfection for the parts, would make up for his inadequacies. Miss Grant, dressed in crisp and frilly blue, had pushed her chair a little back from the table and picked up the morning paper. She was dieting to keep her fashionably thin figure, and had contented herself with an apple and some coffee. Agnes, beside her, in a pink gingham, with her soft wavy brown hair done into cartwheels over her ears, the dimples coming and going in her pink and white cheeks, looked an ideal daughter, a daughter to satisfy anyone. Esther, at the other side, made a nice contrast. Her coloring was a little lighter, and toned in beautifully with the brown cotton crepe she was wearing. Her face, while not so regular as her sister's, was just as attractive in a piquant way, and suited her bobbed hair, which was fluffily curly. Because of her littleness and slimness, she looked younger than she was, nearer 13 than 15. The table linen was white and glossy. A silver dish of oranges and bananas made a bright centerpiece. A shining electric toaster and an even more shining electric percolator stood before Miss Grant's place, and back in the dining room door, Anna, the waitress, in conventional cap and apron, hovered to see whether anything more was required of her before she retired to her own breakfast in the kitchen. Although Miss Grant had the morning paper in her hand, she was not reading. It was rather to prevent Dr. Grant from reading that she had appropriated it. She had a strong conviction that meal times should be held sacred to family intercourse, that one should be one's brightest, most intelligent, and interesting then, for the sake of one's family. Dr. Grant always agreed when she expressed this idea, but he was very likely to forget, unless she expressed it often. It was safer and pleasanter simply to keep the paper in her own hand, and so protect her husband from his forgetfulness. She was talking with more than her ordinary vivacity this morning. Yesterday had been a rather unusual day in many ways, and there had been no opportunity to talk it over with her husband before, as he had been away all the evening and most of the night with a very sick patient. She was making the most of this opportunity of breakfast, because as likely as not he would go away as soon as he was finished, and she might not see him again until that evening at dinner, if then. "It's the queerest household the Gildersleeves have up there," she was saying. "I simply can't make it out why Victoria Gildersleeve's children should be sent off here to Fairfleet, with a cook housekeeper apparently in full charge, and not even a car to use, is understandable, and even when Victoria herself was supposed to be coming, no arrangement was made for keeping an automobile. The garage up at Seaview is simply overflowing with old furniture, tools, flower pots, and what not, and Nellie says, John Hankins says the secretary, Victoria's secretary, wrote Miss Sullivan there was no need to get it cleaned out, because she wasn't bringing a car. The one that brought the maids down yesterday went right back. It was a beauty. A uniformed chauffeur and Victoria's initials on the door and everything. It really looks, doesn't it, considering all that about the garage, that she never really meant to come herself at all." She paused for a reply, but Dr. Grant had grown absent-minded, in spite of being separated from his paper. He was listening to the Bob White. "Well," Miss Grant's tone said, "please be conversational. Remember, we are a family meeting at breakfast." The tone that said all that roused him where all her sentences had not. "Yes," he replied vaguely. "Did you ask me a question, dear? Don't you think it's queer, the whole thing?" "Yes, very queer." But it was only an echo he had given. He was not interested in the Gildersleeve family, really, and he wasn't likely to be, unless one of them should fall sick and need him. Then he would give his complete attention and interest. He felt, however, his wife's dissatisfaction with the echo he had managed, and embroidered it a little after a minute. "There's the housekeeper's friend you mentioned. Taken altogether, it's quite a big family up at Seaview this summer. It's pleasant to have it occupied again." That reminded Miss Grant of something to which she had been giving serious thought since yesterday. "It's a pity about Crystal Barker," she exclaimed. "She's too old now to be so stupid." "What about Crystal? She's not stupid." Dr. Grant was awake at last. If any defense of the Barker girls was needed, Dr. Grant would always be awake for that. That was because, ever since their first winter in Fairfleet, when he had brought Crystal safe through the terrors of diphtheria, he had thought Crystal and Selina two very fine girls, girls of pluck and good sense. Pluck and good sense, to Dr. Grant, with 5 years of surgery and 15 years of general practice behind him, pluck and good sense were the epitome of human worth. And what a nurse Selina had made, what a trained nurse she would make now if he could only persuade her into it. Always in imagination, he saw her moving between the beds of a hospital ward, capped and aproned, ready for any emergency, controlled and gently firm. Crystal was different, of course. As a trained nurse, she would probably not shine, but she was a good patient. She wasn't afraid. She kept her nerve, even when things were pretty terrible. Perhaps that was because she had trusted her sister so absolutely, though. Possibly with any other nursing than Selina's, she would have died. But Crystal had some rare quality, even if good sense might not be a chief characteristic with her. Dr. Grant saw her quality, and to him she would always be the little girl of that frightful time, so gentle and so plucky. "She's not a bit stupid," he repeated, with conviction. He was as tender toward Crystal as toward his own daughters. "You don't think it stupid to give up a chance to make friends with Hilda and Paul Gildersleeve in order to devote herself to that person, that housekeeper's friend?" "I think it was pretty stupid. She walked all the way home with her up to Seaview, and gave her the flowers, the very flowers she had meant for Victoria Gildersleeve herself. She hasn't any social sense. That's the trouble. I don't believe Selina has either, not in some ways. Anyhow, if she has, she's let Crystal grow up like—" Miss Grant searched for a word. "Like ragweed." She had fallen into a country expression, but it perfectly expressed what she meant. Yes, the child's been allowed to come up just any way, like ragweed. "How old's Selina herself?" the doctor queried mildly. Miss Grant's definition of Crystal's way of growing up had not impressed him as very disquieting, but he was interested now, at last, in table talk. "Not quite 20, or just 20. Whichever it is, you must admit that she's done pretty well by Crystal, being so young herself. But I don't agree about the ragweed. If Crystal's grown up like a weed, without much pruning or tending, it's more like fireweed than ragweed. Fireweed's the weed. Don't you admire it yourself, Elaine? Fireweed." But here Agnes broke in. It was too fascinating, hearing her best friend discussed this way. "Crystal's not fiery at all, father," she protested. "Anything but that." "Neither's fireweed," Dr. Grant answered, absently, his ear turned toward the bob white. But Agnes did not notice his distraction. It was silly, she assured him. It was silly of her, father, if she wants to know Victoria Gildersleeve herself sometime. Hilda noticed it so, her making friends with Hebe like that. Hebe's the name of the housekeeper's friend. She laughed about it, and she made me wait on Main Street until they came along to make sure it had really happened, that Crystal had given Hebe the flowers and was walking home with her. She fairly chuckled about it, and kept on chuckling. Hilda's going to be great fun. She has a sense of humor, but she's funny to wear such little girl dresses, and her hair in braids, I think. It's becoming, though, when you get used to it." "Yes, it is," Miss Grant agreed, in her animation making up for Dr. Grant's returned abstraction. "She looks really distinguished. It's clever of her mother, too, or whoever it is who's responsible. It makes the girl Bostonian. Boston at a glance. That's clever, when she's lived always in Los Angeles. There's nothing Western about her whatever, or the boy either. He might be tidier, though. Paul didn't pay any attention to us. Esther offered her impressions to the general discussion. He was looking for birds, all the way up. He knows a lot about them, but I don't believe he'd know us if he saw us again. Who cares? Agnes tossed her head. Hilda's enough. It's going to be a wonderful summer. This morning I'm going up to help her settle her room. It's a peach of a big room, with a view of the sea. What is she really like to talk to? Miss Grant asked, with interest. Why, I don't know. Agnes paused to think. She wasn't very good at analyzing people. That was her mother's especial accomplishment. Miss Grant could tell all about a personality in a very few words, to her own satisfaction at least. Agnes was more vague about first impressions. She's just a good sort, I guess. Fun. But do you know, I'm not a bit sure she and Crystal will hit it off. Hilda said emphatically that she didn't like actresses or like to talk about them, except her mother, of course. I suppose she adores her, but her mother's not like any other actress. Hilda says that she hardly knows any other actresses anyway. She says her mother would just die if she wanted to be one herself. She's like you in the way she feels about that. Miss Grant looked thoughtful. Then she nodded, as though coming to a decision. Do you know, she spoke across to her husband, insisting, for the minute, on his undivided attention. I think I ought to speak to Selina once more about Crystal. It's a shame for a young girl to spoil herself so. I feel responsible for those girls, some way. I always have. They are so very motherless. Selina doesn't realize, I am sure, what going off on this acting tangent may do for Crystal, how it's already making her rather impossible. I wouldn't worry about Crystal, Dr. Grant advised. Selina's perfectly capable of looking out for her. But Miss Grant was very serious. It has actually come to the place, Charles, she insisted, where I am not sure I want my girls seeing quite so much of Crystal Barker. If she hadn't developed this craze for the stage, she would be all right, of course. But why do we send the girls to that exclusive school if all Miss Putnam's careful work is to be undone in the summer? A girl who will pick a servant by choice when she might have had Hilda Gildersleeve. What are you going to do about that? The doctor rose, putting down his napkin and taking out his watch. Nothing, of course, and I count on Agnes and Esther being true to old friends, no matter how many new ones come along. Miss Grant saw her husband's point of view as well as her own. She turned to the girls, when he had gone, with a warning. Don't misunderstand anything I've said, she instructed them, still brightly. In spite of her worries, her brightness had not waned. Of course, go on being kind to Crystal always. I am devoted to Selina, and expect to remain so, in spite of the differences in our ages. Next to Madame Coldwater, she is the most interesting person I can talk with here in Fairfleet. Only Crystal hasn't had your opportunities. We might as well be sensible, in spite of your father, and face facts. Did you ask Madame Coldwater why she didn't invite them to the party? Agnes asked. Last night, Miss Grant had returned from the garden party to go straight off to a dinner party at one of the shore cottages, so there had been no time for gossip with her daughters. She shook her head. No, not exactly, but I did ask her whether she knew that Tinklebell was occupied now. She merely nodded and talked about something else immediately, not giving me a chance. But I shall follow it up later, when there's an opportunity. It is partly that makes me bothered about Crystal and your relations with her. Madame Coldwater had some reason for not wanting the Barker girls at her party. I owe it to myself and to you to find out what her objection to them is. Meanwhile, Dr. Grant, starting out on his rounds, was less tired-looking than usual. He was remembering a hill pasture of his boyhood, and a certain high spot in that pasture where among the rocks, for weeks and weeks one summer, in sun and rain, there had burned a steady flame of fireweed. On this same morning, it was Selina's idea that Crystal should take Hilda a present of strawberries from their garden, picked almost with the dew still on them, and put into a leaf-lined basket. She thought they would be very acceptable, and serve to break any ice that might need breaking between the two girls. In her heart, Selina was sorry that Crystal had not made more of her opportunities yesterday at the station. She thought it a pity that Crystal, out of all the summer population, should know intimately only Agnes, and see so little of other young people. During the winter it was different. Then there were her high school friends, but most of those boys and girls came from Cummington. The two villages had one high school in common, situated halfway between, and even if they lived nearer, still there would remain the fact that they were busier than Crystal, either with summer jobs or helping on their home farms. The more Crystal mixed with the summer population, the more pleased Selina would be. Selina herself was always in demand. If she could have chosen, however, she would have made Crystal more popular than herself. And now it was her idea about the berries, but Crystal was pleased with it. I'll see Hebe, too, possibly, she said. Yes, but I would give the berries to Hilda. You gave Hebe the flowers. Crystal agreed to that. It would not have occurred to her to give the berries to Hebe anyway. She would have to wait some time before the courage would come for another offering in that direction. Hebe was too wonderful a person to offer gifts to in any casual manner. They must be timed, and rather wonderful themselves, gifts to Hebe. Now at 10 o'clock in the morning, Crystal was on Seaview's curving driveway, walking smoothly, not to jolt the basket of berries. Seaview was a big, squarish, dark red house set on a wide lawn. Fields and meadows came right up to the lawn on every side, and a stream meandered across one corner, breaking into its smooth propriety. But the brook and the careless meadows were really in harmony with the house, and indeed a giveaway to the house and its atmosphere, if one looked at them that way, for in spite of its proper lawn, smooth, mown, and level as cardboard, the house was a happy-go-lucky house. It was not old, like Tingle Bell, and it was much bigger. It had been built as a summer place by a pencil manufacturer 30-odd years before, and lived in a few seasons by his wife and her big family of children. He still owned it, but now it was not nearly grand enough for his family. They had a villa at Newport and another at Bar Harbor. The red house had stood empty ever since, except for a season or two when it was rented, always, as it happened, to a big, jolly family with children. So it was used to children and the brook and the meadows. Nothing had ever clouded it or worried it. Crystal had always liked Seaview, but with Victoria Gildersleeve she did not like the name. It was too pretentious for the unpretentious house. It was a coincidence that she had always thought of it too as the Red House. Now she could call it that forevermore, since Victoria herself had rechristened it. She came to the big, wide-open front door. The threshold of the house was right down upon the drive. No steps, no piazza, no vestibule. One step took you directly into the big, squarish hall, with the shallow staircase leading to the upper story.